When you cut a feature from a game, usually it's for a very good reason, like not having enough time to polish it up before release, or not being satisfied with the way it turned out, or having it completely break the way the game is balanced. TF2 notably was going to have grenades before it came out, but that ended up getting scrapped for a number of reasons, most notably spam and other issues. So, how well would it work if grenades were reintroduced into the TF2 we know and love today? Surprisingly, the answer is, it works well. Pre-Fortress 2 is a mod that takes TF2 back to its pre-release roots, with grenades, a lead pipe for the heavy, the pipe bomb launcher for the Demoman, charging the sniper rifle without the scope in, and other additions of that sort. It has some modern inclusions like the engineer being able to move buildings around, and also having the grenades with a cooldown feature so you can't spam them as easily. But it's a pretty good way of recapturing that original feeling of what TF2 was going to be before release. Pre-Fortress 2 plays a lot like the original TF2, with the addition of grenades, of course. The biggest change is how you will accommodate your battles with the new grenades. Every class has them, and usually they have a secondary grenade type as well, everybody with the exception of Sniper, and I'll get back to that point later. You have about 3 to 5 second cooldown between grenade throws, and you have usually about 3 grenades for each category, some having less depending on what class you're using. Like Demoman has more of the MIRV grenades, dynamite packs, than the heavy does. Additionally, there are also some weapon concepts that are restored from the original builds. The medic has a melee syringe that can heal allies and poison enemies. The sniper has the wooden club for a melee. The heavy has his lead pipe, and the classes also resemble their beta counterparts. So the soldier has muted colors, the sniper has his pitch black sunglasses, the spy has the original armband look for his suit, but they're still recognizable. They still have the distinct silhouettes that make them stand out in a firefight, so you quickly know who's who and what class you're up against. There's also a big change in that health is divided up between regular health and armor, which some classes have more of than others. The heavy, notably, only has 100 health, but he has 200 armor in reserve. And armor can protect you from bullets and explosives and other types of damage. With the way combat works, you have to look out for grenades. The Pyro can throw napalm grenades, for example, and serve as area denial, burning an area for several seconds. the Demoman's Merv grenade can make it really risky for engineers, because it can blow up multiple times, potentially destroy buildings. Scout can't double jump, but he's got the concussion grenade, which can blast enemies back and knock you around in the air if you need to get to high places. And he also has the bear traps, which deal small amounts of damage, but also slow down anybody that walks on it. You can't do friendly fire, thankfully, so you can spam them a little more than you probably would otherwise. But they're pretty well balanced overall. Their inclusion feels pretty natural, and some of the maps have also been redesigned. Like, 2 Fort has the early look where it doesn't have the bridge protecting people from crossing over, but this is balanced out by there being more ways to target snipers on top of the battlements. Other modes that came out after release, like Payload, are present, and those are fun to play too. You really get to see the grenades shine in the control point and payload maps. Like, for instance, the Soldier's nail grenade and the Pyro's napalm grenades can block off areas with damage-dealing projectiles, which would make it riskier for you to head in there. If you're being healed by the cart, it helps, but it also makes it so that you have to choose whether you want to run through an area and take damage, or if you would rather wait it out, which could potentially cost you precious seconds that you need to capture a point. This also means that you have more ways to handle your class main abilities. The Spy's hallucination gas grenade is good for throwing off enemies and making it easier to backstab them. The Soldier's mix of frag grenades and nail grenades mean that he's even better at destroying things and keeping pressure on enemies. The Demoman's pipe bomb launcher, it's a lot like if the Iron Bomber could be detonated on its own. You fire off grenades that have very little rolling ability, so they'll usually just stick in place after they bounce off a wall or something. They'll just hit the floor, and then you can detonate them and jump with them and so on. He also has his regular grenade launcher with 6 shots loaded instead of just 4. Some might argue that's pretty overpowered, but considering the fact that everybody else gets grenades, I'd say it's a pretty good trade-off. And it can help also sometimes just to play dirty, and if when you know you're gonna die, just prep your best grenade, have it ready to throw. That way you can sort of hope to take out your enemies with them. Capture the Flag is still fun, even if it feels like it encourages camping a little more. I thought engineers were going to be underpowered in this because of all the grenade types and stuff like the Merv grenades, but surprisingly they still hold up pretty well. You can destroy grenades with bullets if you aim right, but that can kind of take skill, especially in the heat of combat, where there are other things going on, like enemies to fight and other projectiles to dodge. The engineer himself, he can do a lot of good with the building moving ability, which is why I'm glad they brought it back in instead of just leaving it out because it wasn't present pre-release. The Pyro sort of has an air blast. Secondary fire shoots out like a small rocket that explodes and ignites enemies. It works well, I guess. It's kind of like a backdoor way of including the flare gun into the game without adding the flare gun itself, since there are no unlocks. This isn't like TF2 Classic, where there are some alternate weapons you can equip. What you have at the start is what you get, and you have to change classes if you want to change up how you're going to approach different situations. For instance, the Heavy is still great at dealing damage and taking damage. The Medic is a good healer, though you're going to need to diversify how you heal people. I thought it was kind of strange how the Medigun heals slower, and if trying to heal people who have taken a lot of damage, you'll have to use the syringe to speed that up. It also has the heal grenades, which come in handy for healing people in a quick burst, and also poisoning enemies.
It's not a hole.
The sniper still does its job well. It's kind of fun to pull off no-scope headshots, since you can do that now. It's kind of like the classic from TF2, the G36 looking gun that blows up people. I'm surprised he didn't get a secondary grenade. I guess it makes sense since I don't think he had one in the works, but it is kind of lacking. I've seen some people throw around the idea of letting him use Girardi as a secondary grenade, which could be cool. I'm not sure if that breaks the rules of pre-release stuff only, but I'd be down for that kind of change. The sniper could use that bit of utility, and being able to let him help out teammates is always a win-win in my book. Something I would say that I enjoyed is how there's still a decent amount of balance going on. It still feels fair. Like, some classes are a little tankier than others, some are a little weaker because of the way the armor and health are distributed. It doesn't always match up with what they have in the regular game. But it still feels like you have a fighting chance, and if your class isn't doing well against another class, it gives you all the more reason to switch things up and try a different approach. Like, I remember I kept getting into fights with a medic as a scout, and he would keep outdoing me with the syringe and the heal grenades. So I ended up switching over to soldier, where I was able to deal a lot more damage, and killing the medic was a breeze from then on, because I had higher health and much better offensive weapons. I've mentioned some of my complaints already, like the sniper not having a secondary grenade, some of the spam still existing, even though it's really downplayed, thankfully. It's not the nightmare of grenades flying everywhere that I thought it was going to be.
Take the Homer to the enemy base.
Some of the weapons aren't quite up to snuff. The medic's super SMG replaces his syringe gun, which was a concept that was toyed around with, giving him a special type of SMG, and it just isn't good at all. It fires slowly, only has about 5 extra shots compared to the regular SMG. I didn't really notice a deal of difference when it came to damage. Every time I would try to use it, I ended up getting killed. I got more kills with the sniper's normal SMG than the super SMG. I would have just rather had it go back to being the syringe gun or a super nail gun of some kind, because I just didn't find much use for it. I would also say that the scout not being able to double jump is kind of a letdown. I don't know if that was always going to be the case pre-release, but it's tough to do the concussion grenade jumps. It does this 3 beep countdown to let you know when it's about to go off, but it's still tough to time, especially when you're in the middle of a gunfight. Whereas the double jump was quick and accessible, and it gave Scout that extra mobility he needed. I'd really like to see that make a comeback at some point. I mean, that wouldn't be that much of a stretch. That was present at launch. I thought that, well, some of the grenades just don't have as much utility. I found myself struggling to make use of the engineer's EMP grenade. I mean, it's a cool weapon, and I like how it has a disintegration effect, but it never really came in handy to me as much as his normal grenades. In a similar way, I made a lot of use of the Scout's bear trap grenades. I often end up stepping on them as much as my enemies would, but they're very visible and pretty easy to avoid once you spot them. Outside of that, it feels like a fun throwback. I've even got some matches in at Hydro, of all things, and some matches in Well. Those are just fun. I mean, I like these older maps. I've done Gravel Pit as well. It's nice to revisit the launch maps for TF2, especially when they had fun concepts like territorial control. And I think that's what Pre-Fortress 2 was going for. It wants to capture that 2006-2007 era of TF2, while TF2 Classic is more going for 2008 to 2009. It plays well, and it runs smoothly. I didn't have any issues with optimization or anything. I had smooth frame rate throughout. I thought that the maps were well balanced even with the addition of grenades. Most of the new additions are nice. I like that the teleporter only takes 50 metal to build. Makes it a lot easier to build an entrance and exit when you're cut off from the front lines. I also liked how there are still some elements of the modern TF2 that made it, and some quality of life additions, like upgrading buildings, moving buildings around, Pyro kind of having flares to use, stuff of that sort. It's really handy, and it makes it so that the classes play better overall. But in that regard, I'd say Pre-Fortress 2 is worth a play. It's like a step further back into the past compared to TF2 Classic, but I feel like it carves out its own territory in a good way. They stand apart from each other, and I've had fun playing both. I'd recommend giving it a shot, especially if you were a fan of TF2 on consoles, which got few to no updates depending on which platform you played it on. As a guy who started on PS3, it felt like a serious throwback to start out a match without any unlocks or very little abilities that came from contemporary TF2. And it was fun. I liked it.
Yeah, why don't you come over and say that to my face, tough guy?
So thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you on the Pre-Fortress 2 servers. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day.